Hey guys, I'm here with the inimitable Janice Fiamengo. I haven't talked to you in such a long time. It feels like we're visiting an old friend right now. How are you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. Yeah, still as interested in men's issues as ever and as angry as ever.
Likewise. I love that anger too. We don't have enough of it. And speaking of that, I wanted to talk a little bit today just about where we were when you and I both started doing what we do, and where things are now. It's a very different world, I think. I started 2009, started A Voice for Men. It became a top tier website, getting 500,000 hits a month, was growing in popularity. And then Google choked us off. Eventually, I think in about 15 or so is where Google started choking off our returns. But also, 3 years after that, in 2012, is when we had the explosion at the University of Toronto, a figurative
Mhm.
explosion. Warren Farrell speaking there. Steve Brule happened to be there with his camera. And
Yes.
boy, the world talking about men suddenly changed right about that time. Um,
Hmm.
and sort of putting us on a fast track all the way up to now, what we recognize now is that there's an actual men's voting bloc that they can turn in election, which I believe they did in this last one. So I wanted to start with you with just sort of a general question. What is the state of men in Western society right now?
Yes. Well, of course, lots of caveats. I don't consider myself an expert by any mean, but I would say that the Charles Dickens quotation from the beginning of A Tale of Two Cities maybe applies in this case. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. I think that in terms of like the structure of our society, let's mainly talk maybe about the Anglosphere, and especially North America. Laws and policies are still terrible, and I don't think we've made a lot of movement we haven't had a lot of success really in changing things for the better for men. In terms of the threat to the presumption of innocence and due process in criminal courts, the disaster of Me Too and all of its fallout, the utter disaster of the biased family courts and what that means for fathers and what it means for children growing up without fathers, the continuation of affirmative action and equity hiring, which means outright discrimination year upon year, decade upon decade, and any man who objects to it is considered to be some sort of horrible misogynist. All of those things and many more are and just the general disparities, the disparities in criminal sentencing, for example, the disparities in workplace accidents, the disparities in health, and just the general indifference and callousness that our society so often evinces towards men. I still think it's all terrible, just terrible. And but I do think there is a groundswell of awareness, and that is heartening. I think more and more men are waking up and saying, "Wow, this is terrible," and men are starting to care about their fellow men and boys, and that makes me happy.
That is changing, I think, and more men are speaking out. I
Yeah,
wonder what your thoughts are. It seems to me that you know, we promoted this whole concept back in the early days of AVFM of the red pill. It ultimately caught Cassie Jay's attention. She made a movie about it, and the term was even further popularized by that. And now it's grown into you
yeah.
have really, really high profile content creators out there now claiming that they're red pill. But it appears to be that sometimes uh, the meaning of it is starting to morph into something else that's not as beneficial. Um, More the pickup artistry type stuff, and the let's all try to work out, lift weights, and be the alpha male, so we can attract the top tier of women in our lives, which is
Yeah.
more apparently blue pill thinking that's now being rebranded as red pill. Do you? But I still see what's happening as beneficial because it's keeping some kind of conversation going. What are
Yeah.
your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the manosphere is an incredibly diverse space. Obviously, you can find everything there from the good to the bad. You can find a lot of legitimate compassion for men and advice for men about how to improve their lives. You can also find a lot of guys who are willing to exploit other men in, order to make money for themselves. Um, yeah, and I think the continuing problem of gynocentrism. What when red pill just becomes how do we get women, and what do we need to do to improve ourselves so that we can get women? Then that isn't really, I think, what you started A Voice for Men to be about. But and of course there's huge backlash, and there are people combing through the manosphere to try to pick out those few statements that they can exploit and say that men hate women, and they're spreading misogyny, and they're trying to encourage other men to be violent against women. And this is a huge problem. We have to shut these men down. That's very concerning, of course. And you have ridiculous incidents like what's going on in the UK, where they're taking a horrible piece of propaganda. I'm talking about that mini series, Adolescence,
Right.
talking about it. The prime minister of the country is talking about it as a documentary. He can't seem to get it through his head that it's just fiction, and really bad fiction at that, and using that to create policy for the schools so that there'll be even more anti-male propaganda in the schools, and boys at younger and younger ages are going to have it pumped into them that there's something wrong with them, that they're toxic, that they need to take a step back and allow women to, their sisters to come forward and rule the world, because girls, of course, are so much more empathetic and so much more intelligent and so much, morally superior to guys, and we'll have a world without war if we finally empower girls and women enough. I mean, it's just amazing that we have this conversation about what's happening to boys, and the answer keeps being, well, let's tell them even more forcefully that they're no good. Yeah, that is very concerning. But the flip side of that, of course, is that it means that they are aware that they are somewhat losing control of the narrative, and that there is a lot of resistance. Even boys as young as 10 and 11 are starting to rebel against the nonstop propaganda. And so, although it is a really mixed bag, I take heart in the fact that a lot of boys are starting to resist,
Do you
and
think
we
that's,
see that.
I wonder if that's actually happening in the UK. I know that in America, in North America, even across North America, that the youngest generations coming up now are devoutly anti-feminist. And
Yeah,
I hear this from one parent after another that I work with, that their boys hate feminism and want nothing to do
yeah.
with it. So there is a strong reaction here, rejection of all that stuff going on. But the British society seems a little more compliant with authority.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's more authoritarian there even than in Canada, I think. Like the crackdown on any sort of resistance is startling and very concerning. But I do think, like, I've read surveys, and I've read reports on how teachers are so concerned about Andrew Tate's influence and all these kinds of things, and of course the messaging is entirely negative, but it does, if you read between the lines, what the messaging is recognizing is that boys are not, they're not listening, they're not interested. They don't like having female teachers. It seems pretty clear, especially female teachers that are trying to ram feminist propaganda down their throats. They're starting to talk back at a very young age course, what they're saying is often quite reasonable. They're asking questions of their teachers, and yet that's not allowed. But I think it does suggest that boys there are also staunchly sick and tired of being told they have to take second place and be happy about it.
I hope that's the case. I know that I think you're absolutely right about the authoritarian nature of British governance right now. It's
Incredible.
amazing. I read something the other day that there were something like 3,000 people have been arrested in the UK for social media posts.
Yeah,
About 300 were arrested during the same period in Russia for
yeah, I
it,
know.
and it's like, why are we? I wonder sometimes, why are we doing NATO if this is the direction that they're going to go in Europe?
Yeah. I know it's terrible. And Canada is pretty bad too. Like the Liberals just got reelected here, and one of their big things that they tried to push that they eventually tabled, I think, was a new online harms act where they would be basically taking a page out of the UK's book and doing the same thing, arresting people, and then they were talking about like a lifetime imprisonment for advocating genocide. Now, of course, I'm not in favor of advocating genocide, but how that's going to be
I could see them
interpreted.
editing this little slice out of this video. Janice Fiamengo's pros
Yeah,
genocide.
she's pro genocide, but like it's like, wow, what are they, a lifetime in prison for something that you say that is interpreted to mean you're advocating genocide? That's incredible. And of course, like many, lower level offenses than that. So we're talking about prison time for offending the powers that be. And massive fines as well. So they are very committed in Canada to the Liberal government in just shutting down, making it impossible for us to communicate with one another and to share our views and to be critical of the reigning orthodoxies. So yeah, it's a scary time, but I do also think it means that they recognize that there's an uprising of people who are absolutely fed up.
It is particularly scary to me, considering now any statement somebody might make that could be construed as pro-Israel gets flipped on. It's now pro-genocide if you express any support for
Yeah.
Israel, uh,
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah,
they're
I know.
labeling what Israel's doing as a genocide. So
Yeah.
technically speaking, you might get in a life sentence in prison for saying I support Israel. That's how far
Yeah.
these people will
I,
take it if they're
yeah,
allowed to.
it's really, really crazy right now. And yeah, there's so many subjects where you're just not able to have honest conversations at all. So in that sense, I think things have got worse. And I expect that they will probably continue to be really bad, like especially in non-USA English speaking countries. It seems like Australia, New Zealand, the UK, Scotland is terrible, Ireland is terrible, Canada is just a disaster area. Like there is absolutely no commitment to freedom of expression, and they're very gung ho about cracking down on misogyny. The new Prime Minister of Canada has even, explicitly talked about that. The misogyny that's welling up and coming across the border from the United States is
Of
one of the
course,
things that he wants to crack down on. So yeah, so it is really interesting, but I don't know. I just think that more and more people are finding it intolerable, the attempt to police our thoughts. And so I think the worse it gets, the more resistance there is going to be. And so I am really hopeful about that. But yeah,
and
it's amazing. It's amazing to think how far we've come since 2009, 2012. I remember, I mean, I'd been concerned about the lies of feminism. I'd been uneasy in a sort of, inchoate, not very clearly articulated way with the things that were being taught at university and all the claims about women's oppression and patriarchy and male privilege and white privilege and all those things like that had been going on for decades
right.
in academia, by 2009. And I had felt pretty alone. And I didn't know that anybody else was even really thinking in opposition to those orthodoxies. So it was so exciting then to discover. I mean, I didn't discover it until 2012, really, when I saw the Warren Farrell protest, and I realized, yeah, this has become really crazy. Here's a mild mannered man talking about the trouble that boys are having, and he's not even allowed to talk about that. And it was that whole thing about, you're not even allowed to say in a way that's kind of feminist compliant, really. He wasn't particularly critical of women or feminism, and yet you're not even allowed to raise the subject of boys having troubles. Not even allowed to talk about male suicide. You're not talking about allowed to talk about boys falling behind in school. Like that, it was so amazing to me that that was feminist resistance, was a bunch of blue-haired, crazy young women, privileged young women, screaming obscenities at people who were trying to attend a talk, and pretending that they were being oppressed because the security were trying to keep them away from the doors that they were blocking. Like, it was, yeah. So that was my initiation really into everything. And then I found you, and the whole world of resistance to feminist lies, and it was
And
pretty
you quickly
exhilarating.
found out that you were out of sync with most of the rest of your country. I
Yeah.
I have a question about that, and I'm glad I get to talk to a Canadian about this. It has always been my observation that there was this sort of very friendly relationship between the Canadian people and Americans. We always regarded you as sort of our
No.
extra polite, sort of quirky neighbors to the north, but harmless and just
Yeah.
generally affable people. And it
Mhm.
seems like in the past several years, it's become a nation of fascists. What
Yeah.
happened to the Canadian
I think
mind?
Canadians were always like that.
Really?
Well, I'd say since the 1960s or so, the Canadian identity became hating Americans. I think that was always an element in the national psyche, a massive sense of grievance, huge inferiority complex, a dislike of what was seen as American, brashness, get aheadofness. What's the word for that? Just the
Success?
general, like, entrepreneurial spirit, the liking of success and the admiration of the sort of person who achieves it. That those were all things that Canadians came to dislike. There's been collections of books. There's one called The New Romans. I think it was published in about 1967, and it was a bunch of Canadian intellectuals and, cultural workers talking about how America was the new Rome, and that it was a threat to Canada, and it was imperialistic, it was culturally aggressive, and Canadians defined themselves in opposition to that. So we were the peacekeepers. We were not nationalistic. We were multicultural. We were welcoming of others in a way that America allegedly was not. We were more collectively oriented rather than individualistic. And all of those things do lead to fascism, essentially.
Yep.
A herd mind, and a dislike and distrust of individualism and dissent. And so that's what Canada became. And eventually it got to the point where our own prime minister said that Canada has no national identity. It has no core identity. And this is something to be celebrated. But at the same time, if we were threatened by a Donald Trump trolling the prime minister and saying that Canada was going to become the 51st state, which of course nobody could really take seriously. Why would America want Canada to be lumped in and to have all these pinky commies as part of the American?
Just what we need
uh,
is more leftist senators in
yeah.
America.
Yeah. Yeah, so as part of the political fabric. But suddenly we got a national identity again, and that national identity was hating the United States and feeling very, very passionate about it and very morally superior. But that's been the position of Canada all along. And Americans were just too generously oblivious, I think, to have recognized it up
I can
until
tell you,
now.
you've already wrecked all my memories of going to Canada. Everybody was so nice. I thought that was genuine.
I mean, I've never found Canadians to be particularly nice. So there are some, of course, I mean, I'm massively generalizing, but and politeness is kind of a Canadian cliched aspect of our, if somebody steps on your foot and you say sorry. But along with that, there's always been, I think, a very large chunk of passive aggression and a sort of disgruntled sense of moral superiority, especially towards Americans. So yeah, that's always been there, and it gets whipped up periodically.
Is that is this part of this, the fact that Canada has enjoyed living sort of in the shadow of our
Mm,
military strength
yeah.
and our economy?
Yeah, and that's always struck me as just so typical of the victim mentality. It's like they don't Canadians generally do not recognize that we've been able to, we're so proud of our healthcare system, which is a disaster, but so proud of the idea that we have this free system. Of course, it isn't. And the only reason we've been able to spend so much government money on the healthcare system is because we didn't have to spend it on our military. Yet instead of feeling any kind of gratitude or even just like recognition of that fact that we are under the American military umbrella, we just resented American, you know, cultural aggression. And preened ourselves that we were somehow charting a different course. We were the peacekeepers. Yeah, the fact that we've benefited from America's entrepreneurial spirit and its booming economy in so many different ways has inspired not any gratitude or friendliness. Again, just resentment.
Well, that's a common trait around the world, I think.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
it's certainly not limited to Canadians.
Yeah, no, no, and it's just too bad that is what is on the border for the United States to deal with, and instead of sort of waking up to that reality, Canadians are going to now just push even harder against the United States, and it's bad for Canadians, I think, because it means that we're going to destroy our own. I mean, we are really willing, I think, to destroy our own economy to spite the U.S. And I'm sure the Liberals got in largely because Canadians had some crazy idea that to vote Conservative was to vote for the Orange Man, and therefore to somehow betray Canadian independence. That's amazing.
Well, okay, we could go a lot more into that, but I
Yeah,
probably should move on at this point. I
yeah.
wonder what the Canadians are making. Here we are now in America where it is, you would think, and there has been some sanity restored to our governance. There's some really good positive things happening from the top down
Hmm.
in our governance. But we also have many politicians out there drawing a line in the sand to protect child rapists who are being sent out of the country. Um, how
Yeah,
how
it's
does
amazing,
this?
isn't it?
I mean, it's hard for me to imagine how this must look from the outside.
Well, I think most Canadians, like many Democrats in the United States, don't actually see what's going on from the point of view that one would hope. They watch the mainstream news. We have the Canadian Broadcasting
I'm sure they're very
Corporation.
unbiased.
Yeah, and most people listen to that, and it may have been somewhat unbiased, or at least less biased 40 years ago. As long as I've been listening to it, it was really biased. But I think a lot of older people in particular remember a time when it just gave the news. And so they accept that what it gives is the news. And so they just hear bad things about Trump. He's doing terrible things. He's running roughshod over people's civil liberties. He's going to destroy the Constitution, all of that. They're doing terrible things, to these migrants who've committed no crime. Oh, except entering the country illegally. But never mind that. They committed no crime and they've been, contributing so much to the country, and now they're being hunted down and they're being terrorized and, all this stuff. That's what they hear. And they think, wow, he's such an awful man. We wouldn't be like that in Canada. And so yeah, I that from the outside, it just looks like the United States has taken a sharp turn to the right, and that's something that Canadians deplore. And we wouldn't even have anything to do with, well, I mean, we did increase the vote to the Conservatives, and our Conservatives are certainly not nearly as uncompromising in their conservatism as Trump was in, his statements of what he believes in. And so, that was enough, that even with a backpedaling conservative running for the election, it wasn't good enough for Canadians. So yeah, that's I think Canadians now more than ever, but always to a certain extent, see themselves as the not Americans, and that's what they pride themselves on.
What a shame.
Yep, it is. It really is. Yeah, it's a shame.
Moving on, one of the things I wanted to talk about was your involvement in XY Crew. We've been doing these men's groups, and it is a wonderful vantage point to actually look at the lived lives of
Yeah,
men in this community, or at least are sort of inclined toward red pill thinking, but
yeah,
generally looking at their lives and the struggles that they've gone through and how they're overcoming them and connecting to each other. And you've been doing this
yeah.
for years now with us.
Now, how many years is it? 5 years? 6 years?
Six. We've been
Yeah, yeah.
we started, I think you came on a year after we started, and we started 6 years ago this April.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
So
So,
you've
so
been
there it
with us
is.
for 5 years doing this. What has been your takeaways from this? I know I've got mine, which I'll share in a moment, but um, I'd like to know what the experience has been like for you.
It's been pretty exhilarating. I feel privileged to be part of it. It's amazing. One, like I think, like just selfishly, I feel that it makes me. I mean, all those are my friends, so obviously I enjoy it, just on a personal level, and also, like sort of selfishly on a professional level, I feel that it keeps me honest. I understand better than I would otherwise what is really the fabric of men's lives. I every week I'm reminded of what men live with on a regular basis, the men that you don't hear about in the mainstream news, and how strong men are, both individually and in groups. And it is really gratifying to me to see men supporting one another, holding each other accountable in incredibly gentle, loving, but firm masculine ways. It's yeah, it's really wonderful. So yeah, I'm just super happy to be part of it.
For me, part of it is when you have an environment of men, and with all respect to you, I mean, you're highly revered among the XY crew community, but most of what we do is out of the view of any women.
Hmm.
That's probably 80, 90% is no women allowed on the scene. And what I found is when you remove women from the scene and you remove
Yeah.
men shaming each other into compliance, they're remarkably emotionally in, I don't like the word emotional intelligence too much, but the acumen is there.
Yeah, for sure.
It's amazing the skill that the guys deal with each other, how they bond with each other, like you talked about, holding each other to account in firm but very loving and understanding ways, in ways that only a guy who's been there can really
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah.
Um, I see a great deal of healing going on with this, and that
Yeah.
is the most amazing thing for me. Some of the stuff I've witnessed was unexpected. I never knew what it was like until we did XY Crew to have this
Yeah.
kind of environment for men to share their lives with each other.
I know. It's so good. And like I mean every week's different, but like every once in, well, not every once in a while, but like there'll be a week where one person will, for anybody listening who doesn't know, like often we'll just do what we call checking in, where one, first person will say, yeah, I'll do my check in. He takes 5 minutes to say what's going on for him that week. And then maybe there's discussion about it, or maybe then goes on to somebody else. And like sometimes a guy will say, I really need to do my check-in because I'm struggling this week with this, something to do with his custody case, or his wife is really causing problems, or he's struggling at work, whatever it happens to be. And then sometimes then one person will respond and will say, I really hear you, and I wonder if you've thought about doing this, or look at it from this perspective. And then somebody else will jump in and say, yeah, I know what you mean. I think that's a good idea, but you might also want to look at it from this perspective. And sometimes in the whole hour and a half or 2 hours, we always go 90 minutes, but sometimes we go 120 minutes, sometimes we go 2.5 hours. And sometimes the whole session will be basically a discussion of that first person's check-in. And it will just become this like global kind of synthetic discussion, in which everybody relates to the thing that he talked about and has suggestions and analyses and expressions of sympathy and support. And it's just like, it's amazing. I never imagined it would be that good either. I thought it'd be mainly like just people talking about their lives and being friendly with one another. And of course, over the years, like a lot of us have been there for the whole time, and so those friendships are pretty solid now, even though many of us have never met in person. Some of the guys have, of course. But like, I just never imagined it would have the depth of understanding and like the many layered responsiveness when you get a whole bunch of guys thinking about men's issues in the way they do and applying it to an individual life and an individual situation. It's just yeah, it's mind-blowingly interesting and encouraging.
And so what do you make of the SPLC having labeled us a hate group?
Yeah. I mean, what can you do? Like, I'm, in a way, I'm glad. In a way, I mean, it's a stupid thing to say that I'm glad, but it just proves that we do live in a through the looking glass kind of world, where if and they don't even know, like, it's just a made up thing, a designation that based on absolutely nothing at all. And I like to tell people who still think the SPLC has some kind of legitimacy. I like to tell them that a group that has been around for years, in which men support one another in their difficulties and struggles, and that is labeled a hate group. Yeah, that's the upside down world that we live in, that ridiculous organization can pretend to judge a group of men that it doesn't even know anything about. Yeah.
And they don't care to. What is really so fascinating about this is that uh, AVFM was designated a hate group
Yeah.
before, and I left AVM. I handed it over to Robert Brockway, who's done a great job running the site. It's totally his site now. But it's the same website. All the same articles are there, all the same comments, all the same everything that was ever there. The SPLC took off the hate group designation for AVFM because I left there, and now XY
I
Crew
know.
is a hate group.
Yeah. It's
And
yeah.
how much woman bashing do you hear?
Zero.
Same
I
here.
mean, yeah, it's
Maybe a
incredible.
sideways comment once in a while, but I mean, nobody's coming in there to talk trash about women. These are guys that are looking to improve their lives, to make friends, to connect with each other, and to grow as people. That's all that's happening here. I just find it amazing that it's hard to imagine any organization being that corrupt and
I
that
know. Yeah.
disingenuous.
Yeah, it's just amazing. Yeah, like I often think it, you could record like for hours and hours and hours, and you'd be working so hard to try to find anything, and it would just be like, well, women tend to, and it would be a generalization about women, but it wouldn't be. It's certainly, yeah, it wouldn't be misogynistic at all. And I mean, obviously, probably if there were somebody who wanted to be misogynistic, he wouldn't be coming to my group. But it's just it's so incredible. And I know that if there were women's groups, or there are women's groups, I presume, that have a sort of similar function, and they're probably ragging on men all the time because we see them doing it very publicly, and that's perfectly acceptable. But men aren't even allowed to get together and talk about their own lives with other men outside of a feminist framework in which they apologize for their toxic privilege. They're not even allowed to do that without being called a hate group. Yeah, it's really interesting.
It is, and I can promise anybody listening, there's no hate involved in this thing. There's a
Yeah,
great deal of love and compassion and connection, no hate. Uh, but I
yeah.
guess we'll just have to take the hate group designation as a badge of honor. Uh,
Yeah, it has to be. Yeah, it's just amazing.
so there's also a segment of the manosphere, if we're going to call that, the term Christ pill has been thrown around some for sort of red pill Christian men, and their voices
Mm,
are coming. But what we hear from a lot of them is shut up and get married. There is, and I won't name any individuals, but I'll point at places like the Daily Wire, where these
yeah,
they're promoting men. You've got to get married. I don't care what her history was. I don't care if she had, a 3-digit body count before you met her. But if you met her in church, she's perfectly marriageable, and you need to marry her up. Um,
yeah.
how did we
I know.
get somebody taking the foundation of red pill thinking and red pill philosophy and turning it into you must blindly walk in to your life being under the governance of family courts in
Yeah,
order
I know.
to be a decent person.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, isn't it? Yeah, what started in the protest marches and then invaded the academy went out and invaded every single institution, including the Christian church. And yeah, it's just amazing, isn't it? And all churches, synagogues, whatever, religious ideology, it just got taken over with this male shaming, uh, elevating women as the ones who must be protected at all costs. I remember somebody telling me about how he'd gone to church and the pastor had said that one time, all the husbands were to turn to their wives and apologize for the manifold failures and inadequacies, in their marriage. And of course, nobody would ever do that in the reverse. And yeah, it is. This is something we talk about in XY Crew all the time because there's a lot of guys there who want to get married, and there's a lot of guys who are defenders of marriage as a wonderful thing, and there's a lot of guys who think it's a disaster for men. And so we talk about that, and how do you, if you're a young guy, and that is, that's been one of your dreams for your whole life since you were a little boy, that you wanted to get married and you wanted to have a family, and now you know that if you do, you might marry a wonderful girl. And then in 10 years, all of a sudden, she becomes something different altogether. And the state is going to support her every step of the way in destroying your life. And yeah, it's terrible. I'm
And
just actually reading a book right now on marriage, and they're trying to make the authors are making, they're two Canadian authors out of a Catholic kind of think tank, and they're making the case that marriage shouldn't be just understood as like the thing where you find your soulmate, but that it should be understood as a social good, like it's a pillar of a healthy, functional society, because um, married couples, especially those who have children, but not only those, they do all sorts of good things in communities. Marriage tends to be good for the woman. It tends to be good for the children. Children born with two married parents still living together, they do better than others. And so they make all those arguments, and they even say that marriage is good for men too, in terms of health outcomes and all that sort of thing. And I was talking to a friend about this, Don Laufadale, I'm sure he wouldn't mind my saying, and he said, yeah, but often these studies say they compare unmarried men with married men. They say, look, the health outcomes are better, the economic outcome is better for married men. He says, what's missing there is divorced men. And they tend to lump divorced men in with the single men. And that's why single men are often shown to be doing so much worse. But the reason they're doing worse is because of the impact of divorce on those men. And the only way not to be experience those impacts, unfortunately, is not to get married. And so I mean, the suicide rate, the depression, the despair, the heartache that goes on and on for years, if your ex-wife decides to try to destroy you, it's just, yeah, it's terrible. And so it's like, I don't have the solution to that, except that, and I don't see it happening anytime soon. I don't see that Trump and Republicans are the least bit interested in what may be the most pressing issue related
No,
to men
they're
and
talking
families
about
today.
paying women to be single mothers now, as though we don't
Exactly.
already pay women to be single mothers. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
$421 billion annually on single mothers in this country. And Trump, I love the guy, but I mean, it's insane that he's come
Yeah.
up with a plan. Let's pay you more money to be, not pay fathers, not pay couples, but pay women uh,
Yeah.
to have babies. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah.
And I
It's
wanted to go back
really
to a point about the
worrisome.
church a little bit too. One of the things that I've experienced as a Christian churchgoer is that couples in church communities do well, really well, until there's a problem, but there's a pattern that
Right.
occurs
Yeah.
the moment there's a problem.
Yeah.
The congregation will circle wagons around the woman, no matter what the circumstances. Usually, I mean, she'll say, yeah, he was mean to me, or
Yeah.
something like that. Clergy will turn on the man. The congregation will turn on the man, and the men in that congregation will tell the guy getting screwed over in family court that this is what Jesus wants him to take.
Yeah.
And I've
Yeah.
seen it over and over. It's just mind blowing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and yet we have these religious men out there saying, "Oh, the church will save your marriage. It's a wonderful place for married
Yeah.
people." Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it's horrible. It's a horror
It
show when
is.
things go wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, the unfortunately, yeah, if you're not in like an orthodox kind of culture that is explicitly anti-feminist, you're going to be in both the gynocentric. I mean, I think the gynocentrism part is probably inevitable. It's just part of humanity when we're in groups, especially in Western culture. But it's going to become colonized by feminist thinking, in which the man is the threat to be defended against, the woman is the vulnerable, innocent victim to be defended, and the guy is going to be blamed and exiled if he doesn't knuckle under. Yeah, it's terrible. It really is.
Yeah, I had a discussion once online on Pearl's program with Andrew Wilson, and who tried to assert during that conversation that all this gynocentric behavior in the church, that was just Protestants. Catholics didn't do that. And Catholics are some of the worst about this. I've worked with thousands of men. Many of them have been Catholics, and they went through the same scenario that I just described a moment ago, that she said he did something wrong. Everything became his fault. And guys ended up, some of them excommunicated
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
from their
I
churches
know.
because of accusations from the woman. Um,
Yeah,
so
no,
it's
it's
not
terrible.
just the
Yeah,
feminist ideology, it's the romantic gynocentrism that comes in there
yeah,
and fuels this insanity. It's
yeah. Yeah,
madness.
the church, all churches. I mean, I don't know about Islam. I assume it might even be being colonized by feminism now, but certainly all branches of the Christian church have been thoroughly taken over by feminist ideology. The book that I'm reading right now, Defending Marriage, it's um, very well intentioned, and is trying to make the case essentially for people who are skeptical about marriage, and so it's mostly looking at progressives and feminists. So I assume both authors, I know one of them, I assume both of them are sort of conservative leaning, but like the reflex gynocentrism of it, and the anti-male bias is just, it hits you over the head if you come at it from a sort of red pill perspective. Like that, they talk about how they use the cliche that marriage civilizes men. Like, I know what they mean by that in a way, and this has good health outcomes. I understand what they're saying, and I can see it to a certain extent. Maybe you have probably better meals if you're a married man. Not better meals, but more regular. There's a certain regularity in one's life if one is married. But does it not civilize women then? Like, I look around me, and what I see in our society are millions of women who desperately need to be civilized. But of course, they'd never say that. There was another part, they're talking about how men tend to see, they tend to commit to fatherhood more absolutely if they are married to the mothers of their children. And then if they get divorced, their commitment to fatherhood tends to wither away after the divorce. And that was just like they were citing some sort of social science research to make that point. And it's like, well, what about the many, many cases in which the man who is being divorced against his own wishes, because we know that about 70 to 75% of divorces are initiated by women, not by men. What about the man who's being divorced against his will and against his wishes, and wants desperately to be involved with his children, and yet is prevented from doing so by false claims about his, by his wife, about how she's afraid of what he might do, or he has made threats or whatever, all of these things that can be alleged in a civil court, and don't need to be backed up by any evidence. Like, they don't even mention that as a huge issue for around fatherhood. And like, so and these are like conservatives who are trying to make the case for marriage, and yet they're so oblivious to the reality of marriage and divorce for millions of men. So yeah, it's yeah, these are the hurdles that we still have to overcome when we get outside of our space where we've got heightened awareness about these issues. I think we still have a lot of work to do to make those mainstream. And we're working against like such a huge bias. Like you say, it's amazing.
It's crushing.
Yeah.
I'd
Yeah.
like to go back and
And
go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, like, and you were mentioning about, Trump and the Republicans, and, like, I know a lot of people really admire Ron DeSantis, and, in many ways seems very kind of principled, and maybe even red pilled about some things. But, he was very gung ho about a bill to make men pay women from the moment of conception, so that he wants to increase the financial burdens on men, and yet has nothing to say whatsoever about men's rights as fathers to actually father their children. Like, it's just, how much more feminist can you get then? That all the man is really is a money machine. He's got all the responsibility, but he has absolutely no say in parenting his child. It's just terrible. And I mean, there are hopeful things that Trump has talked about, the end of DEI, bringing back merit in various domains. I mean, those bode well for men for sure. But we've got he's not going to touch the Violence Against Women Act, which funnels, I don't know how much money now per year
About
into,
600 million,
yeah.
as I
So,
understand it.
going into, all these organizations that either are for women and explicitly exclude men even from being, treated as victims of domestic violence, or funnel into explicitly anti-male propaganda programs. I mean, like, it's just,
And most of the money ends up in very high salaries for these program administrators that aren't
yeah,
actually doing anything.
yeah.
It's nothing but a political slush fund.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, like the feminist machine is so big and so powerful. And I don't see any will on the part of most Republicans to even begin to dismantle it. And they know that the outcry from women everywhere would be just, so startling that I just think they're
Well,
not
you would
interested
think
in
we would
even
have
trying.
feminists for DeSantis at this point if he's talking about let's, just go ahead and rifle through all the man's assets from the moment you get a plus sign on your home pregnancy test.
Yeah.
Let's go take his money right then and there.
Hmm.
You'd think he
Yeah.
would get support, but no. The the left could do a lot better than that. I think that's what they're thinking. I do
Mhm.
wonder though about the relative silence in feminists about Islam. Um,
Mm. Yeah.
they're more likely to talk about
Yes.
Islamophobia, far more
Yeah.
likely to talk about that and condemn it than to talk about the standards for women and the aspects of
Yeah.
Islam that if we were Westerners practicing this, they would be absolutely
Yeah.
considered brutal oppression.
Hmm.
Um, Yet there's no noise whatsoever. Is
Yeah.
this really just women longing for somebody to take control?
Well, that's certainly, I mean, I've heard that argument and I've sometimes thought there may be something to that. I think that theory that women have a kind of secret desire for the strong man, and that in fact the women who have survived throughout the ages, over centuries and centuries, have been those who were willing to switch their allegiances to the conquering men. If
Yeah,
that the
just
women
ask
who
the
were.
Sicilians.
Hmm. Yes. So if you are the loyal women who would not, who fought with their men and would not allow themselves to be taken, didn't end up passing on their genes, and so the women who were able to adapt were the ones that thrived and who had children and all of that. So it kind of makes sense that that's how women are. And we know women like masculine men. And so I can imagine that there are some. I wrote a piece about a woman in Britain who's like uh, um, basically a immigration advocate, and became involved with foreign aid to Somalia, and befriended a bunch of Somalian men, and was defending a number of Somalian men in the UK who had been convicted of brutal rapes and had been going through, spending millions of taxpayer dollars going through the whole appeal process. And she was, advocating for them every step of the way. And there were all these pictures of her with Somalian men and everything. It was like, so she's a feminist. If you look at her Twitter feed, it's all about empowering women and keeping women safe. And, we have to be aware of domestic violence and sexual violence and all these things. And yet she's defending men who obviously did commit brutal rapes and are quite unrepentant about it. And so I don't know, I don't know her psychology, but I do have to wonder whether there isn't a kind of
I mean,
erotic attraction there
you
for
look at what
these
people do more
foreign.
than what they say. It generally
Yeah.
informs you a lot
Mm,
more. I get the feeling as you're
exactly.
talking about this, though, that you may be entertaining other ideas about how this.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's that. I think that's very possible. I also think for a lot of women, it isn't even an issue. Like, I just think for a lot of feminists, what matters more than anything is not the safety of women or women's empowerment or anything like that. It's just being ideologically correct. And so feminism is really about ideological purity for them. And so I don't think they actually care. Most of the feminists whose names and voices are, broadcast on the airwaves are very upper middle class. So they don't have to live in the neighborhoods where you are in danger of being raped. Those are all theoretical issues for them. So I think all they really care about is their standing with their fellow feminist
Very much like
advocates.
the ultra leftist people supporting open borders. They live in
Yep.
gated communities. It's not going to affect them.
It's
Uh,
not an issue. No.
the
Yeah.
only
It's
way
just
they'll be
about
affected
standing.
is if they can't hire a maid. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I really think, and and that happened, like feminism was overtaken by intersectional ideology way back in the late 70s, early 80s. Lesbian women, Black women, Muslim women started accusing white feminists of being, not acknowledging their privilege, their heterosexual privilege, their white privilege, their Christian privilege. And those women were stuck then because they'd been accusing men of not being aware of their privilege. They'd made this whole theory about how privilege by its nature is invisible to the person who possesses it. And so the only thing you can do once you're accused of privilege, if you say you don't have it, that just proves you have it. So you have to confess it and, declare yourself willing to join forces with those who are less privileged than you are in order to attack the edifice that makes such privilege possible. So they were stuck. And so they had to concede that Black women, lesbian women, Islamic women, etc., women with disabilities, that they had a greater insight into the lived experience of oppression than white heterosexual feminist women did. And then that made it impossible for them then to intervene in these kinds of conversations because the person who has the least privilege is always the most powerful voice. So all they could do then was concede. And therefore, anytime there is an issue that has anything to do with any of the axes of oppression, whether that's racial or, in terms of sexuality, or colonized versus colonizer, in the case of Islam versus Christianity. They don't look at the various horrible acts that Islam has committed all around the world. They only think of Islam as a colonized religion and a colonized people. So that's why things get really complicated when you're talking about the very uneasy relationship between multiculturalism, for example, and women's security. And that's why, for instance, in the UK, there has been this enormous silence on the part of feminists about the history of the rape gangs, and which were mostly
it's
committed by,
conspiratorial at this
I
point,
mean,
how
it's,
much they're
yeah,
suppressing what's happening.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, they have people on record saying that they never wanted to speak out about it because they were concerned that they would be accused of racism or Islamophobia. And that goes back to the 1980s. So this has been going on for decade after decade. And most feminists are just not interested in talking about it. And they certainly will sort of elide the racial and religious element of the whole thing. If this were a case of white men who had been for 40 years, forming inter what's the word I'm looking for? Networks of other men to rape Muslim girls from age 11 to 15. I mean, it would be being talked about every day, and it would never ever cease. So it's clear that it's very
No, we'd
uncomfortable for
bring
those
back
feminists.
public firing squads if that were going.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, absolutely. Like it would be a feminist dream, and people would make their careers on it. And it's been amazing how few feminists in Britain have been interested even in mentioning it, let alone, campaigning on it. So I think that is really the issue that for many, many, many women, I mean, and I think this is just true in general about women. Women are interested in knowing what they should think about various things. They're not really interested in standing on principle. Men are the ones who are interested in universal principles. Feminists have actually criticized that as somehow lacking. They think feminists have a more nuanced and relationship based kind of ethic. And what that means is that they look around and see what is the popular thing to believe and say, I believe. And then that's the position that they adopt. And so, various positions that don't seem to actually make any sense and that even contradict feminists' own stated values can still be held by feminists.
The power dynamic in all this, I find fascinating. One of the images that flashed in my mind as you were talking was going back to one of your lectures that was videoed and put on YouTube, where you were being shouted down by supposedly oppressed women, uh, with even the local security could do nothing about it.
Yeah.
Uh, Yet you were representing the patriarchy,
Hmm.
and the real power in this.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, well, if she's representing the real power, shouldn't they be arresting the
Yeah.
people trying to? But it is,
Yeah.
it's backwards. It is
Hmm.
totally, uh,
Yeah.
it defies description sometimes.
Yeah. I know.
What are,
Yeah, the alleged victims, the powerless, the marginalized, are able to get away with actions that the privileged and powerful would not even be able to imagine. I mean, that was the thing that was so obvious about the Warren Farrell event. That his talk was delayed. I think he did eventually give it to a very small
yeah,
room full of people after about an hour and a half. I mean, imagine that. Like, and the it was so obvious. If a group of male students had come out to prevent whoever, Gloria Steinem, or I don't know who,
it would
some
have been over in
feminist.
3 minutes.
Absolutely. I mean, those men would have been, I mean, they would never would do it. I can't even
Yeah,
think of such a thing happening any time in the past 50 years, if not any time in human history, that men would do that. But if they had tried to, yeah, they would have been hauled away bodily. The university would have apologized, profusely to the speaker and whoever had tried to come out to hear her, and would have put in place rules to make sure it could never happen again. At the University of Toronto, that ridiculous thing happened. Young men attending who wanted to come because I remember the one that Steve Brule interviewed. He said two friends of his had committed suicide. He nearly broke down in tears just telling Steve about it. Two friends of his had committed suicide in the past year and a half, and he wanted to come and have some understanding of perhaps why.
right.
And he was sworn at and, given the Heil
He,
Hitler
he
salute
was
and
called a
berated.
Nazi, and
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
like, yeah, like it's just unbelievable. And those people full of righteous indignation, thinking themselves as victims and standing up for the oppressed. Yeah, I mean, all you have to do is see that and see the whole thing is upside down. These people are terrorizing others, and they have institutional support to do so. And the police and security guards won't even lay a hand on. They abused the police and the security guards that were there trying to keep order. I mean, it was just incredible. The foul mouths, the entitlement, there it all is. And yet we're still supposed to believe that somehow women live in fear.
And, and I know at this point hundreds of red pill men, and yet I honestly, in my heart of hearts, cannot think of one red pill man I know that would want to shut down a feminist lecture.
No, no. Mm. I absolutely, he'd go and he'd have a carefully prepared question to ask in a civil manner at the end of the talk.
Yep.
And he'd probably be hauled away just for doing
Just
that.
for asking the question.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. It's like, I don't know, men are, we're obviously at a disadvantage. I mean, you were the one who said that I think it was you said something like, what would happen if feminists started a gender war and no men showed up, or what if they had
I
showed up,
said, what if we had a gender war and men showed up?
yeah, yeah,
It
and
would
it
be a
was
short
because
war.
yeah, yeah, if they had showed up, but that was the whole point. They didn't show up, or they did show up and they just laid down their arms and said, "Oh my God, I never thought of that. I feel so bad about it." And they started taking classes to unlearn their masculine privilege or whatever. And and then they realized 2 decades in, 3 decades in, 4 decades in, 5 decades in, it's never enough, never, never, never enough. And that was so evident, just to go back to the latest election campaign, the Democrat campaign was just, you men, there will be more shaming, and you will never escape the shaming. Not only that we're not even going to care about your issues, but that you have to be shamed even more. We're going to have more abortion advocacy. We're going to have more affirmative action for women. We're going to have more rhetoric about how women are superior and are going to take over the world. And you're going to take all of that and you're going to be like Tim Walz, and you're going to be happy, so happy to play second fiddle to a black woman and show how you don't have a problem with giving up power. You don't have a
And she was
problem
only too happy to select him as a running mate because
Mhm.
of that.
because of
That's
that.
what got him the job.
Yeah, exactly. What else did he have going for him? And so that was supposed to be what men are to look at and see, that's the future of me. And it still won't be enough. I'll still have to have all the blaming and the campaigns. And, I'll have to see my own standard of living going down, down, down. And then I'll have to hear complaints about how I'm not really doing my share and I'm not attractive to women anymore because I don't make enough money and I'm not bringing enough to the table. And I'm not doing enough to end violence against women and all of those things. Like it's just going to go on forever. And that's it. And I think finally, that was the sort of the breaking point in a way. I mean, remember that ad, the Man Enough ad, or what it was, where they had all those actors saying, they say women want to control their bodies. I say go for it. Kill as many unborn babies as you want. What have I got to do with it? I just got a penis, nothing to do with me. My mama taught me I'm not going to be a man that tries to belittle and put down women just so I can feel like I have power. I'm not for that. And I think men finally said,
And I'm
no
sure
way.
his single mother did tell him that after she
Yeah,
wrote his father
exactly.
off.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's such a sad statement about this is what Democrats are telling men, that this is the only way you can be a good man, is to completely apologize for the fact that you are that
And you're
and
right, though, it
expect
still won't be enough.
it still won't be enough. You'll still have to apologize more. And I think, yeah, finally some guy said, no way. Like I'm not, this is just not attractive. And so
If
finally
you're a
now,
man and you peek your head just a little bit out of the
yeah,
gutter, some woman will tell you to check your privilege.
yeah, yeah. And that's, and for a long time, I think a lot of guys have just been thinking, okay, I'll just keep my head down. I'm not gonna, eventually this will pass. Eventually we'll reach a point where they'll be satisfied. And I think some guys are finally realizing now, nope, it's not ever gonna pass. And we're gonna have Michelle Obama standing up there lecturing men that they're not even allowed to have a different opinion about abortion without having to hear about what terrible, terrible people they are. And, yeah, it's just amazing.
Let me put you a little bit on the spot here. Did we make a mistake giving women political power?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, terrible, terrible mistake. Yeah, and people had some reservations about it.
A lot of women
A
had reservations
lot of
about it.
women had reservations about it, and but boy, it happened fast, didn't it? I mean, how many years was it? We had 1848 was the Seneca Falls Convention, when
Right?
women first called for the vote and made up their list of demands, their declaration of sentiments, in which they claimed that men had from the beginning of time oppressed women for no other reason that they wanted to exercise an absolute tyranny over her. And men signed that document.
Yes,
Something
they
like, what
did.
was it now? I can't remember, 32 men, I think, and 60 something women signed that document. I mean, that to me is amazing. That was the patriarchy
Proof
back in
positive that
1848.
simps are not a 20th century or 21st century product. They go back.
Exactly. They go back, and how I just thought to myself, how many generations of men were told that they were not good enough, that those men signed that declaration, and the declaration is full of lies. I mean, it's amazing. It claims that women have been prevented from accessing higher education, for example. It wasn't even true, and they must have known it wasn't true. There had been institutions of higher education available to women from, like, the late 18th century.
Right?
Oberlin College, one of the most esteemed institutions of higher education, had opened in 1836, I think, or 7, one of them. So it had been operating for 10 years before they even wrote that ridiculous document claiming that women weren't allowed to go to university. And men signed the document saying that there was a patriarchal conspiracy based purely on men's desire to oppress women, and that they were sorry for it and it had to end. And yeah, the whole thing of it, there were concerns that women were not as interested in politics as men. And we still see that. The surveys show women are interested in, they're not interested in national news, they're not interested in international news, they're interested in human interest stories, they're interested in the fashion page, they're interested in the weather, and things like that.
And
They
they
are
don't
not in,
they don't vote in social interest. They vote in
no,
self-interest.
yes, yes, that's the other thing. Women are not interested in the general good. And they've made that clear over so many different issues, obviously over abortion, obviously over many other issues. They don't care when others are suffering. They don't care about what's best for children and families. I mean, obviously, some women do, but overall, and they don't even think in those terms. They think emotionally. So we've seen the rise of demagoguery. We've seen the rise of facile appeals to feeling rather than to fact, to the extent that many now, women in particular, some men too, don't even know why they vote in the way they do. They can't even articulate a rationale or any kind of like
Well, they can't
principled
even
based.
articulate why they have a protest sign in their hand in front of a DHS facility. They,
Yes,
they,
I know.
when they're asked, why are you here? They can't even say.
Yeah, I know. It's so, yeah, I do think, I mean, unfortunately, it means like I've come around to thinking that it means that yes, there would be women who can make enormous contributions to public culture, who will be limited by, in my world, and that's just too bad. That there will be very talented women who will be able to bring their talents to the public sphere in some ways, but it wouldn't be in the particular ways that women demand. And I think women are not equipped to be politically empowered in the way that we have empowered them. Some are, of course, but the majority are not. Of course, there are some men who are not really equipped either, but in general, men are more interested in a principled social order and are more interested in actually discussing and arguing about what is best for the whole society. And we've now come to the point where we can't even have that conversation. Like, that's the
Right?
amazing thing. We don't have discussions anymore about what's best for the social good. All we ever talk about is what's best for women. And it's not even what's actually best for them in terms of what's best for them as moral, beings, because what's going on now isn't good for women
Well, they're
morally,
miserable.
or they're miserable. Every single survey that ever is done since the 1970s shows that women are less satisfied. Even though they say they think things have got better for women as a result of feminism, they are less happy and less satisfied in their lives than women previously and than men are. So yeah, I mean, and obviously having no moral standards at all for women is not good for women's morality. I mean, it's such a bizarre contradiction. We claim that women are more moral than men, and yet we don't hold them to the same moral standard that we hold men. So if they are more moral, shouldn't they be held to a higher standard instead of a lower one? But I mean,
We can't
that's,
discuss that.
yeah, we can't discuss any of that. When women kill their children, it's always because they were victims. When men kill their children, it's because men are brutes, and everything from that too. And when women kill their husbands or partners, it's because they were being victimized. When men do so, it's because men, exercise power through violence and all that. So yeah, so we can't, all we ever talk about now is what can we do to make women happier? And meanwhile, women are getting more and more miserable.
And the more
And
we
Bill,
do what that we're told women want to make them happier, the more miserable they get. And
yeah,
they're unable to stand apart from all this and look at it objectively and
yeah,
say, this isn't working.
yeah.
Let's even let me ask you if you can to produce your magic wand for a moment. How do we unscrew ourselves from this? I mean, society's deteriorating, the family's breaking up, things are going in way, I don't care how good we're doing economically at the moment or anything. So socially, we are screwed. We really are.
I
How,
know.
how does this change? Do we have to have a collapse? And,
Yeah, I mean
and then
that's what some people say. Yeah, I mean I don't know. This is where I just I don't know. I don't see the future. I don't know the future, and I don't have an explanation for how we can improve. I really don't. I mean, the only thing I can think of is that just to go back to what I just said, we absolutely have to put a moratorium on any discussion of what will make women happier. Like we have to recognize that talking about women's happiness is a dead end. And that what we got to start doing is talking about children's well-being and the well-being of families and what can make that possible. And if that means sacrifices on the part of women, just as it's always meant sacrifices on the part of men, then so be it. We're going to have to start looking at those things. And we're going to have to start talking about virtue again, which I don't think we've talked about for, at least the last 60 years probably, or
right,
maybe
no,
even
that's
longer,
just,
maybe the last century. And so we've got to start talking about that again too. Like adult women have got to decide to be adults. And or like I think, in a way, like I want women to choose, but of course they're not going to. I'd like women to choose. Either women are adults and therefore can be held to adult standards and can be expected to pursue virtue, because the ancients and the Christian philosophers understood that happiness has nothing to do with a feeling. It is about a life lived in pursuit of virtue based on rational principles. And so either women can decide that they too are adults and that that is going to be their quest to live a life of virtue, or they can decide that they're really a kind of children, that they are not capable of moral maturity, and in which case they'll simply be, have decisions made for them and they'll be looked after by their fathers or brothers or husbands or whatever. And or the society in general will just simply make rules for them. But it has to be one or the other, or some combination of both. but it has to be explicit, because what we have now is the infantilization of women, and it is really striking how even how women look and their affect, the obviously the way they present themselves, the way they talk, everything about them is more and more like a teenage girl. You can hardly tell the difference. and
no,
and
you absolutely get accused of misogyny for saying it, but the first image that came up in my mind was that rocket ship that
yeah.
carried those women. They were like screeching 13-year-olds. It
Hmm.
was embarrassing.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
can't can you imagine a group of men acting
yeah.
that
No,
way?
I know.
It's
It's
absolutely
yeah,
unthinkable.
it
But it's
is.
like the old adage, we asked women, are you equal or are you special? And they said yes.
Yes, exactly, exactly. I know, and that was the magic trick. It's I remember reading about the Titanic, which sank in, I always get the date wrong, 1912, April 1912, the Titanic sank. And of course, we know the story, all the men who died so that women could get on those lifeboats. And it wasn't a class issue, because many, many extremely wealthy elite men from first class died when that ship went down, because they lived according to that code, and they had to. I mean, there were men stationed at the lifeboats with pistols to prevent all men from getting on. And I used to know the survival rate, but it's something like, in the 70% for women and much, much lower, I forget, for men, about 20, 25, around there. So, and that was during the time of the great suffragette movement and the demand that women wanted to be treated as equals, and they wanted the vote and all of that. And after that, the slogan went around, you either have to choose. It's either going to be votes or boats. And that was the idea, that if you want equality, then you'll get equality, and you will not get chivalric treatment. You will not be treated as special and as precious and as deserving of protection. And women said yes. And that's what we got. Somehow they managed the trick, that here we are over 100 years later, and they're still special. They still expect to get in those lifeboats. They're not going to go down with any ship. No way. And
No,
yet they expect to captain the ship. And if it sinks, under their they're
Yeah,
control.
if they wreck the ship, they'll be the first one in the lifeboat.
They'll be the first one in the lifeboat, and
Yeah,
it'll have been a man's fault, either because he did something, he abused her, or he did something to the ship, or he just told her she couldn't do it because she still hadn't been encouraged enough by her society to believe in herself. And that's what we'd have to do, is just make her believe, like it just, I don't know, it just never ends, that women demand both things. And I don't know, but how we can convince men to say no more. But that would be my ideal, is that either women grow up or women admit that they don't want to grow up. I'd be happy with either. I mean, I would prefer to grow up
right.
personally, and
And
just
I
take
can
it,
tell you that men would prefer that.
yeah, I think most men would, although
Most
many
men,
men, I think,
no, some men
yeah.
are fine with the little girl thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like the Freudian implications of any of that garbage, so I stay away from it. I'd like a grown
Yeah.
up, but I do
Mm-hmm.
recognize some men want a dependent child posing as a wife, and we got to
and I
own that.
and I think some men just think that the dependent child is all you're ever going to get anyway. I think some men think that's the nature of women, and so they might be happy with
I think
the
those guys are right in the being the nature, but I also think they're selling themselves short. They don't
could
have to accept a child where they need an adult. It's a
could
choice.
could well be. So, but and like personally, I have always well, I mean, it's complicated because, like, I recognize I'm very feminine, and I don't mean that in a to praise myself. I'm more emotional than the average man. I get more upset than the average man over relatively trivial things. Hello. Yeah, still going. Yeah. My husband just got home. I have lots of stuff. Okay, okay. And so what was I saying about that? Yeah, and you know what, and I'm agreeable in that sense, that I don't like public confrontations. I don't deal well with them, so I'll agree to things, like in a conversation with somebody I don't know very well, that I don't even believe in, just because I don't want to deal with it. I'm not good, like if a tradesman has not done his job well. Like my husband's really good at saying, well, look, you said you were going to do X and you didn't, and what are you going to do about it now? I just can't do that. I can't stand it. So I recognize I do have those, like, certain typical feminine weaknesses. So I want to live in a world that is realistic about the differences between men and women. And I'm not physically courageous, and I know that. Like, if I was in a train wreck or something, I know most men, their first thought is, and I think this is like a biological thing. Okay, what do we do now? How are we gonna? Can we get out of this train? Can we save people? What's the first thing we have to do? All that. And I remember somebody writing in the comment section of one of my essays, that he was in a train wreck, and he said most of the women, or maybe even all of the women, just stood rooted to the spot and screamed. And I would do that. I would not be a part of the rescue crew. I'd have to be rescued. So, like, on the one hand, I kind of recognize that there are those, I think, very significant average differences between men and women. At the same time, I don't want to be cosseted and protected. I want to make a contribution to my society, and I want to live in partnership with men, and I want to bear my burdens too, and I want to take responsibility. So I guess I want something in the middle. I want to be treated as an adult, but I guess I would also have to acknowledge that there are differences between men and women, average differences that probably a healthy society would acknowledge.
Well, rational societies
A,
certainly
ra-
would.
a rational society, yeah. Hmm. So
Janice, I
yeah,
got,
so that.
go ahead.
So I guess I don't really have an answer, but I think that would be where the like the conversation would have to go, like to figure out how we're going to negotiate the demands of adult citizenship and recognition of the differences between men and women, and how we deal with those. And we've always recognized that men have certain strengths, and men have certain weaknesses, and bad men, tend to be bad in a certain kind of way. And men's badness tends to be aggressive violence and, maybe ruthless, striving for status, let's say. And so we put in place all sorts of rules to protect against those qualities that harm society that are typically masculine. But we don't have any rules to protect society from typically feminine, problems and vices and evils. And we anything where we're trying to put curbs on feminine frailty or vices is seen as oppression. So again, it's like so unequal.
And if you don't believe that, folks, try to have a conversation in a workplace about relational aggression.
Yes,
You end up without a job that way.
exactly. Yeah.
Janice, I could have this conversation for 2 more hours and I
Me
still
too.
wouldn't be tired of it, but at some point we got to stop. I do want to leave with one last question. And this is one of those BS things interviewers need to ask. Where do you see us in 10, 20 years as a
Oh,
society?
um, well, I know where I hope I'll see us. I see us probably pretty much in the same place, but I hope with a growing awareness on the part of men of where things have gone wrong. I hope that I will see more and more men looking out for one another. I think that's it. And recognizing that the world is crazy, that they are not crazy, seeing the massive hypocrisies in the way issues are discussed and dealt with, and determining that they are going to look out for their fellow men and boys, and that they're going to dedicate their life to helping other men and boys. That's what I hope will happen, so that we can start changing the cultural mindset.
And that's a perfect setup for me to pitch one more time XY Crew. If you like this kind of discussion, if you believe in what Janice was talking about, a growing community of men that support each other, that recognize that they are not crazy, that they are in fact sane, living in a crazy world, drop by the link below, visit us at XY Crew. You'll enjoy yourself. Janice Fiamengo, thank you so much for
Thank
sharing your
you.
time with me today. I really
Well, it
appreciate
was my pleasure. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
it. Take care, folks. Bye bye.